Welcome to Collaborators, a video podcast that explores the art of songwriting and creativity and aims to inspire artists to get dirty. My name is Jake Decker, and I'm a singer-songwriter. Join me as I tour across the U.S. to share my music and learn from the artists I meet about their songs, their stories, and the wisdom they've gained along the way. In this episode, I sit down with Taylor and Chloe Turner of the musical duo Chasing Lovely. We discuss social justice in songwriting, their recent tour, and the tension between the writer's message and the listener's interpretation. You can find out more about their music at chasinglovely.com. Enjoy. Tell me about your tour. Like you were telling me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so this past in July, we were up in the Midwest and in Iowa and Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, which is where we're originally from, Minneapolis. And we did probably like a week-long tour where we just
a week and a half.
Was it a week and a half? And we just like knocked out shows.
It was a lot of fun, just nailing them and going and seeing some of the people that we had seen before and played shows for before, and then doing some others that were a little bit bigger and a little in like more venues, which we usually play house concerts, so it's smaller and more intimate, which we really enjoy. Yeah. But it's also exciting to just play in a bigger room where you can't see into the, like, make eye contact with everyone in the audience.
See into their souls.
Yeah, I mean, generally we can see into their souls, but sometimes you're just like, I don't know if I can handle what you've got going there today.
Today is a little much.
So, but it was nice to just have that, you know, the mix of the different kinds of shows that we had to play, instead of, you know, it being the same thing all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, fun to switch it up a little.
What kind of, like, what music are you listening to in the car when you're on the trip?
So when we are traveling, for example, on our way here to this interview, we were listening to reggaeton, which is like Latin club music.
Yes.
Okay. I love that stuff so much. Sometimes what we listen to really has nothing to do with our like personal music. Taylor's an artist. You're obsessed.
Stromae, he's like this Belgian French singing, I don't know, like electronic
kind music, and he's just weird and awesome.
Yeah, but if you if you translate the lyrics, and both Clay and I, we studied French in high school, so we pick up on some of like the content of it.
20%.
It's very just interesting what he talks about. So I don't know. I think there's something about listening to international artists. We also listen to the Somalian rapper named Kanan. And I think it's so interesting to hear experiences of people from different countries, because it's something that we're not super exposed to. So like when we're listening to Kanan and we get to hear about what is life like in Somalia, or
escaping there.
Right.
Or, you know, from the family who still is there. I feel like listening to other people's albums, especially when they're so vivid, it's like watching a movie. Like what you get out of watching a movie, you can get out of some people's albums with the stories that they tell, and the intimacy involved in that. And so yeah, those are some of our favorites right now. We listen to some of that weird stuff now, but we also, you know, listen to a lot of singer-songwriter-y stuff, or have in the past. Artists like Noah Gunderson, or Sleeping at Last, or Gunger,
the Civil Wars,
and pop music too.
Imagine Dragons.
Imagine Dragons.
So hard for Imagine Dragons since like their first EP.
Yeah, like the EP that we can't even find anymore. Who else do we listen to? I love Bruno Mars. You like Lana?
Yes, I do.
Lana Del Rey. Who else? I don't know. Like regular people pop music that people know of.
I remember last time you guys were here, we were talking about how there are certain artists that we'll listen to, and they will write something that sounds so cool, but like if we tried to pull it off, it sound like lyric wise.
Yes.
Like there's some words or lyrics that some artists can sing, and it sounds so cool when they say it. But like when I sing it, it just sounds super cheesy. Do you remember that conversation at all?
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, it's not like vivid.
Yeah.
but I can imagine how we would be talking about that.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that you often can find that when you're singing along to things. And I love that about other artists' music is a lot of times, like when I listen to stuff like Lana Del Rey, for example, I am nothing like Lana Del Rey. Like I'm the opposite of who Lana Del Rey is. She's like this bad girl, like, I don't know, troubled and like is super clingy to guys and like, I don't know. She just, her whole thing is totally not who I am. But in a way, there are artists that you can sort of take on their persona when you listen to it. It's almost like, oh, for like 30 minutes of this album, I can feel like this badass kind of like, I don't know,
troubled person.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think it's kind of similar to movies in the way that, you know, you're immersed into this whole world. I think some artists really do that. They kind of create this whole space of like this fantasy land of...
Well, there's something about just owning whatever you say and whatever you put into your lyrics or your music. In the same way where you see somebody wearing like this really loud, weird outfit and they're just killing it. And you're just like, how did they walk out of their house? Like, I would feel so self-conscious and uncomfortable doing that. I remember the first time I wore like a wide-brimmed fedora. I thought everyone was looking at me and I was like, oh man, but I want to be a fedora person, so I'm going to be out here wearing this. Here we go, world. Or, you know, you wear bright lipstick and you're like, you know, people are like, why are you doing that? You get used to, you know, presenting yourself in a specific way, and sometimes it's your natural way of being, and sometimes it's who you want to be, so you embody this person or these words or this idea before it becomes you, and then it kind of does become you. So yeah, I don't know if we have any like wild things that people are like, oh, I don't know how they say that. I mean, I don't know, sometimes we say things where we're just like, wonder how this room of people is going to take this. We live in the South. Oops. But here we go. Yeah, let's just put these lyrics out into the world.
It was funny because just this morning I was going through like our old YouTube stuff that's like private and not out there anymore because it's from a long time ago. And we had this song about this girl who was gay, and like from like way, way, way long ago.
Back when we used to play country music, like we wore boots in the video that we made for it. And I was thinking, it's so funny to think about like how far back we've always had like this tendency towards like kind of social justice-ish kind of stuff, like from 6 years ago. Yeah. And it like repeatedly is something that we're like passionate about or drawn to. And so I think definitely when you are like down here, growing up in Minneapolis, it's like a totally different world up there, as far as like the political scene and like the progressiveness of the city. So moving down to Nashville, and then I guess also now we're in Atlanta, it's interesting when you're putting out stuff that you're really passionate about, but you just don't know how the audience is gonna like respond to it. It's like, ooh, is this gonna like make people feel uncomfortable? Which I guess to a certain degree you have to just say, okay, oh well, if they feel uncomfortable, like this is important enough for me to say it. But we do have moments when we're just like, oh goodness, like we're in Trump country right now. I'm really nervous. I saw and we're talking about our history of slavery. And
oh gosh.
Oh boy. Like, but we just go in there and we're just like, all right, we're gonna do it, and we're not gonna change our set list because I know that 80% of these people voted for Donald Trump to be our president, and they don't believe the same, you know, some of the same things that we do. But we're just gonna do it and wear our loud shirt and walk around in our fedoras. So here we go.
Do you ever try to explain those songs before you sing them, or you just like go into them?
Oh no, all the time. Like most of our show is, I think over the years, like Chloe and I, we've been playing for about 7 years.
Yeah.
And over time, at the beginning, it was, okay, you have to like talk about the song beforehand. You have to like
intro.
You have to talk about
Taylor,
what this is.
Go. We'd be behind the microphone and be like, it's you.
And I'd be like, nope, it's you.
She'd be like, no, bitch. Go.
No, it's you. So it's like awkward for like a few seconds. He goes like,
and
no
it's whoever's the most, like, once the most time has passed and we're just so uncomfortable that someone's gotta say something.
Just like
we're just like,
up.
and this song, like, we're
that was kind of us
so
in the beginning, but over time, like, we've almost grown into this sort of, we've embraced the intros and like being able to expand upon our songs, because I think especially when you have original music that you're playing, a lot of times people aren't in the headspace to listen to 60 minutes of songs that they've never ever heard before in their lives. So we found it really helpful to kind of set them up and get them in that mindset of like, oh, this is kind of what this song is about. So even if their mind drifts during the song, if they come back in, they'll kind of remember, oh yeah, this was a song about this.
Now I can jump into the story when I haven't been paying attention or processing the entire time. I think that was especially important for me to understand, because when I listen to music, it's the music first that I consume. I will know every single lyric to a song until I'll be like, oh yeah, that's really interesting the way that they phrase that. And I'm like, oh, what are they even saying? I haven't even processed. I know all the words, but I haven't processed any of them because I'm just enjoying it and consuming it. But I think a lot of our music really, the storytelling is crucial to them just really getting to understand what we're trying to say. And we don't want them to miss it, especially if it's their first time, and that's how we connect with people. So we set up our songs and we tell stories about them and prepare the listener for what they're going to hear. And even in all situations, most of the time, unless we're having an audience that's like not listening or distracted, you always have audiences that are less than ideal, in situations that are less than ideal. But we'll always set it up. Sometimes we'll shift, the stories we tell based on what the audience is. If we have a audience of people who are just like randomly broke into Bernie Sanders chants, like we'll be able to be like, oh, we can talk to this crowd like this. But if we know this crowd is like more into something else, we'll try and adapt based on who's in front of us, so that they're able to connect with the song in the way that's going to be most effective for them.
Yeah, I think our show is definitely a performance, and it is a show. So we make it very much about what's in between the songs as the songs themselves. Like, that's just, I guess, who we are as performers. And I don't know. I feel like I would love to hear like other artists kind of talk about like where they got what they got inspired by to write a song, or I think that'd be super, super interesting. So
okay, so let's talk about like social justice in songwriting. How do you feel like people are receptive to social justice like messages in songs rather than like some other medium? Because I know Facebook's a terrible example, but like everyone's just angry, just sharing all this. And I understand why people are, why conservatives here maybe aren't receptive to more progressive point of view, because there's a lot of sarcastic, like, well, you guys are idiots.
Yeah, right. Most definitely.
So how do you see, not the, I don't want to use the word fruit because that sounds so churchy. But
we will come from this, okay? We know this lingo.
But how have you seen people respond to those messages through your songs?
Well, I think it really depends on the song and how you're going about it, because social justice messages are definitely kind of more touchy subjects when you're writing about them. And I think you kind of have to establish at the beginning during the writing process what angle you're coming at it from, like what emotion you're coming at it from. Because if you're coming at it with an emotion of anger, you have to understand that you're coming from that emotion, because otherwise it can really get out of hand.
Which is a valid place to come from. You just have to recognize it.
Yeah, so that when you're writing it, you can write it really thoughtfully.
Right.
I would say the stuff that we've written has kind of been either a story that we've heard, like several years ago, I wrote a song about mental illness because I had been to a seminar in college where a few women spoke about their struggles with mental illness, which is something that I had never experienced, and I hadn't had a lot of people around me who had experienced that.
Or at least that we're talking about it.
Right, and that we're open about it, because there's just such a stigma surrounding mental illness, and it was just very eye-opening for me. So, like, after having that experience, it just hit me, and I wrote a song just because it was so, like, powerful to hear that. So that particular one was just literally me taking their stories and like writing it into a song. It really wasn't from my perspective. It was just, here's this story. We have a song that we released on our latest EP called Always and Never Enough, which was a mixture between sort of like the feeling of helplessness and sadness that we were feeling, but combined with a let us look at our complacency and what is our responsibility and what actions can we be taking amidst the grief that you feel. Because there's one thing between feeling grief and feeling sadness and feeling helpless and wanting to change things, but if you stay too long in that space and you don't actually go out and do something, you're not helping any more than someone who doesn't care about the issue. If you're like not going out and taking action, you're just sitting in your house feeling sad about things, and that's just not productive. When we're writing songs like that, it is like, for that particular one, it was kind of self-introspection as well as
I think that one we
expressing.
took from a personal level too, and trying to see different situations. You know, we were both feeling very like defeated and almost depressed and just confused about things out in the greater span of what's going on in our world, in our country, but also just in different personal relationships, and where we can see some of the similarities in, you know, how we're interacting with people in our personal lives, and how us as humanity, how we're interacting with each other as a whole. So I think we tried to portray that in the song, but also just take it, like Taylor said, on a personal level. You know, how does this have to do with me, and kind of turn it on yourself, rather than like, look at all those stupid people out there.
Admonishing your audience. I don't think that that's going to be helpful, and I don't really think that like super, super angry songs are necessarily going to be overly productive. But yeah, I think one reason that I think it has, the song has been received well by audiences, because I think it's, when you write authentically about something that you're feeling, there's generally at least one person that feels similarly or has had kind of a similar experience. And I think we're like, we turn it back on ourselves. We're not sitting there like saying, oh, you guys should be doing this. The way that we phrase it was like, what can I be doing? What can I be doing more that I'm not doing? Or
and it's been interesting because the song Always and Never Enough is one that we have been nervous to play in front of audiences. Definitely in the different situations that we found ourselves in, we're just like, I'm not sure how they're going to react to this. And in one of the more particularly nerve-wracking situations, it was, I knew these people were all like, you know, very conservative, supporters of Donald Trump, and that's not generally where we fall. So we were nervous to say, you know, talk about some of these issues. It doesn't just come out there and say it, but it does talk about issues of, you know, our history with the Trail of Tears, our history, and how we got to where we are based on building, you know,
a country off of
slavery and free labor and, you know, mistreatment of other human beings and these kind of things, and not necessarily lifting up our country in the best light, but saying like, we can do better. And the reaction was surprising because at the end of it, they were moved by it. And also it was interesting to hear because somebody in the audience said oh, you need to send that to the Trump campaign. They would like that song. And then someone else was like, yeah, the Clinton campaign would like that too. You should send it to both of them. And it's kind of interesting to hear. I think that moment was especially eye-opening for me, even in the humanization of, quote, the enemy. I don't want to say the enemy, but that's the easiest way that I can understand the them, the other, the people that you're oh, well, I'm not like them, was just to be but they see the world in a very similar way than we do, as we do. And it's they have a lot of the same emotions. It humanized them for me to even hear that. And yeah, it was a surprising reaction to hear that from such an extreme sides, because we're very polarized.
Yeah, I think anytime that you're tackling an issue where you're talking about differences in opinion, you just always have to come at it as much as you can from a place of respect, because if you're just being disrespectful to someone, they're not going to hear what you're saying either. You're not going to change their opinion. You have barely no chance. So, when I think about people who, if you feel so passionately about it, if you really want to, be progressive, change, and move forward, part of it is our responsibility to say, okay, how can I approach this in a way that they're going to be more receptive to my opinion as well? Because just putting all this hate and anger out there and doing that, it's not to say to not be angry, because there are definite reasons to be angry. But it's saying if what you're trying to accomplish is to change somebody's mind, the way you approach it is so important.
Tell me about a song that was hard for you guys to write. Whether it was just writer's block, you got to a point you couldn't finish it, or something that was maybe emotionally tough to sift through as you were writing. Mm-hmm. Tell me about a song like that.
Man, I would say the whole last few batches of songs that I've written, I do 90% of the songwriting for our group, and I would just say over the last maybe year or so, maybe even year and a half, I would say writing has been kind of a struggle for me, just because when you are at something for so long, it's not super, super long that we've been at it, 7 years, whatever, but I think when you put stuff out there and you're I envision it to be more successful than it is, or I felt
You're this great.
Oh my God. Anyways.
Very real.
Yeah.
Sorry, you can start over.
Should I start over? I don't even remember. I was talking about how when you release songs, I feel when I release songs that I'm wow, this is some of the best work that I've ever done, and then it kind of just sort of it goes and then it tapers off a little. I think that can be a little just defeating personally in your head, and it can kind of play psychological mind games. And I think for the past year or so, I have felt a little bit oh God, what's even the point? I put this out there, and I'm still just grinding and grinding and grinding as far as the work and the amount of amount of output that you have to do to make this work and do music and drive all of these hours. It's you just, I don't want to say I feel such a little wimp when I say it like that, but when you do have kind of a lot of stuff coming at you from the stress of the job, it is so vital to have the response, and even when somebody after a show comes up to you and says oh my God, that meant something to me, it's helps fill up the tank.
They're
again.
Oh, you probably hear this all the time, blah blah blah, whatever, but they sometimes will still tell you anyways, which is awesome. but it actually does matter in order to like keep your creative
Spirit
energies still going, because when your creative energies are like kind of drained and you're feeling defeated, it's hard to write from that place and
right.
feel good about it.
You're just like, well, maybe I don't know, they're just like little demons in your head, like, well, maybe I'm not even very that good at all, like clearly like my song isn't getting this much response, like what's the point of even like doing another one, maybe it's just gonna be bad too, or just little things that you start thinking to yourself as you're writing, which is horrible because you're supposed to be having fun and being excited about it. So I think that's probably been honestly the biggest struggle through with writer's block for me, is just sitting down and having the intention of not putting too much pressure on myself.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of the songs that were on this last EP kind of came from a space like that. It was songs that we, had for a while, but we didn't necessarily like the whole song, so we took it and like rewrote it and had to sit down in a place and like get vulnerable with one another for a number of these to get them to where we wanted them to be. The song called Skeletons, which is where the Things We Don't Talk About title comes from, ended up being kind of a bonus track. It was recorded live in one take in a room with a piano, and we shared a microphone and just kind of did it raw. But the song really, it meant something to us, but there was just something wrong. The first verse wasn't any good. Not good. And we were sitting down, we kept playing the song. I was going through a number of different things, and every time I had a different situation with a different person, I would still be like, that's what this song makes me feel like. That's what I'm going through. And I was like, Taylor, this song is amazing. She's like, I know, but like, it didn't feel right.
Right. And I feel like we rewrote that first verse like way too many times. And I think after you do that a number of times, you're like, well, maybe it's just never going to happen for this one. Maybe I'm never going to hit on a verse that I like, or like sonically that sounds good to me.
And then you either make a decision to be like, whatever, it'll just have a crappy first verse, or you're like us and we're just like, fine, trash. Like the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard too, like when you go back and edit and you write so many verses, even like the first edit, trying to get that first melody out of your head that you already wrote, you're like, oh, it keeps coming back to me because like that's what I remember how it's written. And so you have to not only like have the capacity to like creatively write a new verse, but try at the same time to forget the old verse that you wrote. So that was a little bit of a struggle. And I would say emotionally, that was a struggle from a writing perspective. But I would say Always and Never Enough was definitely emotionally difficult to write. It took 7 months for us to write that song. So it was one of those things that, thank God Chloe was co-writing on it, because I probably wouldn't have like stuck it through that long, because we would sit down and we'd write one verse and then it would be a few weeks before another one would come, which is just not my process at all. I don't like to have that kind of patience. Yeah. But she's like, no, I think this is really important, Taylor. Like, let's just keep sticking it through. I know it's hard. I know it's like a mental marathon. And I was like, okay, like, thank you for the support. Yeah.
But and it was emotional too, just with the things that we had to remember to write it, and the things that we had to be honest about with one another to write it. It's like, we're close and we know each other really well, but it's still, every time you kind of have to sit down and just bear everything with someone else, it's terrifying, and it makes you feel weak, and it makes you feel vulnerable, and we kind of shared different experiences that we had separately, that we had together, and in the way that impacted us, different things that we were seeing outside of our personal bubble, and how that was affecting us. I feel like some of our best songs have come from like these emotional moments and being vulnerable and the honest stories, and even songs that we listen to when we're like, wow, that was real, and I can connect with that because people don't talk about that. And that was kind of what we tried to get with this whole album. It's just like, we want to be able to put words and stories and honesty to things that people aren't saying, but a lot of us are feeling.
I feel like in our society, we always have this tendency to try to like chase happiness, or, I mean, there's like a million different books on like the pursuit of joy, or how to like do this, or how to be happy 24/7. And I don't think that that's actually a true possibility, like, for anybody, regardless of, like, how much money you have or, like, how much you love your job or, I think that there's, even if you were, like, 100% everything in your life was stable and awesome, that would even freak you out a little bit to think, oh, like, you have to have, like, that,
the ups
and downs to kind of create sort of a story for yourself in your life. And I think music is an awesome way to show people how to sit in the darker, like, rougher moments in life, and process them and get through them. And almost, it's like, when you listen to someone, like, sometimes the most sad songs are honestly, like, the most beautiful. Like, sonically, I'll listen to it and be like, wow, that was just, like, so powerful.
Yeah.
You know?
It also has, like the beauty's manifold, you know, so you can write something that's really dark and people are going to extract different beauty out of it. And you can have a very specific message and someone's going to get something different out of it. Do you ever feel that tension between the inevitable fact that someone's not always going to get what you're putting down, like, on the head of the nail, and trying to communicate that message that you have directly?
I don't feel like a intense need for people to get out of my song my initial, like, intention for it, or, like, the story that I originally intended. I love when somebody can take out their own personal experience or whatever they happen to be going through. I think once you put a song out there, it's open for interpretation and people can take it and, like, almost wear it as their own sort of, and everyone, it's going to look different on everybody. And I think that is kind of the cool thing about songs. And I would say even some of the more ambiguous songs where you're not, like, writing, like, for example, the Dixie Chicks' Traveling Soldier was kind of a really, 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 really specific storyline. So that one, I mean, obviously, if you knew somebody, like a friend or a family member or a loved one in the military, you might, like, adopt that as sort of
your own story.
But I think there are even songs that are more ambiguous than that can kind of take on their own life, personally. And like, we generally try to lead people in a certain direction when we're presenting our songs, but if that's not where they end up, to me, it's just like that they got something out of it, not necessarily what it specifically was that I was trying to. And if there is something super specific that we're trying to get across to people,
well, it's usually written in a song like that.
Well, or we can do it in another form, like in another creative form. We can write a blog about it, or we can talk about it, or have a discussion, or post about it on social media. Like, if something's super, super important, and if they didn't pick up on the subtle, like, climate change, like, message that I threw in there, which I don't think many people do, that I could go around and, like, post on my Instagram and with, like, about my recycling and, like, I don't know, like, you know,
I feel, I was reading this book called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And she wrote something about how, you know, different people would come up to her after reading her memoir and being like, man, you know, your story, the way that you left your abusive husband and blah, 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 it helped me do the same thing. And she's like, I didn't write about leaving my abusive husband. You read that because that's what you needed. But that helped them to get to where they needed to be because they were able to read their own stories into her story. And I think that's something that music really has the ability to do, to present, you know, an idea, an emotion, a story, but allow it to be owned by whoever is consuming it.
Right. I don't even think, sometimes people don't even listen to the lyrics. I've talked to people and said, like, how do you process music? Just because I'm curious. And some people they just listen to the sonic, like, melodic portion of it, and they have absolutely no clue what the song is about. Like, if you ask them, they're like, I don't know what the story is about that song.
Yeah.
And So clearly, like, they're taking on something completely different for what the song means to them, and maybe it's helping them, you know, after they lost their job or something, or if they went through a breakup, but that's not even what the song was about. It's just, like, about calming their nerves, or, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, what advice would you give a new songwriter?
I think there's, like, a lot I could pack into that. I would say to try to follow your curiosity, and that, honestly, wherever that takes you, whether it's if you're on the train or you're in traffic and you notice people around you, just observe a lot and just take things in and slow down. Try to look at your phone less, maybe, so that you can be really present when you're out and about, because I think part of the job of songwriters is to pick up on little details that everyone else is kind of busy or, like, doesn't see it the same way. I mean, I think that's really all artists in general, like, even photographers. Like, the reason that they capture what they capture is because they noticed that paint splatters on the floor had some sort of beauty to it. And I think that's kind of what we do, is we say, what's here? Like, what am I missing? What's passing me by? Or what's right underneath my fingertips, or so to speak. So I would say just be curious, because that, I think, is also going to continue to keep it fun as well. Find out about something that you have no knowledge about. Like, learn about something new. Because anytime, you know, you're presented with something novel, or if you have a challenge, you know, if you're trying to, like, learn a new skill, I think oftentimes you can translate that and put it into a song, and don't avoid failure. Don't worry about it being bad. I think we even just said that earlier with, like, the whole Taylor Swift thing, but I read a quote that said, like, the worst thing that can happen when you create art is that it sucks. That's literally the stakes.
Yeah, and I think for me, as somebody who has more fear involved in writing, like Taylor said, she does 90% of the writing, so obviously it's not something that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a writer, I've always done this. So for people who might be more in my space, where they don't feel like, oh yeah, I'm a writer, I've got such great way with words, and, you know, this is my talent, and everything I make is beautiful. I think my advice would just be, just make something that you need. Because when I'm writing songs with Taylor, it's because I need a song out there that's not there, or I haven't found yet, so we're making it instead. And also just that there's no pressure. If you write it, if it's bad, it's bad. Nobody ever has to see it. Don't let the fear of somebody saying it's bad keep you from doing it, because it doesn't matter. Do it because you want to. No pressure.
If it's like, I don't know, I feel like early on when we were starting out, we got a lot of advice about, like, you have to sit down, you have to write a song a day, and, you know, if you're not doing this, then somebody else out there is doing 5 times more than you're doing. And it was just like, holy crap.
Like, do you enjoy your life? Like, what are our priorities here? Like, do it because you like it and because you can't not do it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, I don't know. I think Taylor and I are just so much about, like, pursuing what makes us curious, and, you know, living a life that is something that we're proud of, and being honest about what makes us happy, and kind of sticking to that, rather than being like, success, man, if I write a song, well, you better put it out on YouTube and for your whole family to hear and everyone to judge. Like, nobody needs to ever hear it. It doesn't matter. If you want to do it, do it. If you think it's awesome and you want to share it with other people, then share it. If you think it's awesome and you don't want to share it with other people, then don't. It's your stuff, your life, your art. You do what you want with it.
Right. And definitely don't put too much of, like, this is my career success. Like, early on, just, like, let yourself create it, and don't, I would say, just stave off of putting all of, like, that businessy marketing kind of, like,
pressure.
mindset off of it in the beginning, because you just need to realize like what it is that makes it fun for you, and not get into this whole, because I think the earlier on you do that, the more you start getting those psychological messages. So the longer you can hold that off, the better.
Preach.
I like what you were saying about sort of like the artist making connections between things and like drawing what you're observing together. My poetry professor at Georgia State, he was the poet laureate of Georgia for a while. His name's David Bottoms, and his metaphor about that was like the poet is like everyone basically has a radio, and the poet has to like tune their radio to a certain frequency to pick up all these like hidden signals and waves that are all around us, like they're all here. But your radio has to be tuned in to hone in on the significance behind this physical world.
Yeah, totally. And the more you do it, the more it kind of becomes a habit. You know what I mean? Like your observation and acute observation can totally be made into something that like you eventually, like at the beginning, you have to super work at it and be really like conscious of, okay, I'm going to observe now. But honestly, like the more that I'm writing, and like during the periods of where I'm writing a ton of songs all at once, I generally find that when I'm in that mode, like I'll be brushing my teeth and I'll think of something. I'll be going to bed and an ideal will come to me just because I'm in that mindset of constantly observing, versus when you're just kind of going through your day to day without doing that. It's definitely one of those like kind of muscles that you have to work in your head. But it's nice when you've been doing it for like so much that it just is like, okay, everywhere I'm going, I'm seeing something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Collaborators, a video podcast for creators. This podcast was created by Jake Decker and edited by Dean Lawton. For more episodes, visit jakedeckermusic.com/collaborators.